In 2016, while he was on his way home from work, 21-year-old Darren Mitchell would post his final message on Facebook, and it only becomes more haunting after hearing his story. Darren was from Southeast Texas, where he had been living with his fiancée along with his 1-year-old daughter that the two had together. Darren's main career goal involved him going to trade school. However, his fiancée would say that he put his dreams on hold so that he could support his family while she attended nursing school. During that year, that portion of Texas had seen a record amount of rainfall and storms, the like it hadn't seen before, and at that time, Darren had been serving as a member of the United States National Guard. That meant that during his drive to and from work, more often than not, the skies were filled with clouds that were pouring down rain. Now, if you have ever been in Texas during a rainstorm, you will know they don't have the best drainage system for the roads, which more often than not causes flooding. May 26 was one of the worst storms, with rain coming down for about 24 straight hours. And it just so happened that on that day, Darren was driving home from work when he suddenly hit standstill traffic. The rain was coming down around him, and all Darren could do is sit and wait in his position on Texas State Highway 105. As Darren looked around, he would have seen the fields and tree line around him begin to flood with water. Darren now found himself in a particularly terrifying situation. Not only was he stuck in traffic due to severe flooding that had blocked off the road ahead, but he soon became locked in from behind as the part of the highway behind him began to flood as well. Darren decided that the situation was a fairly serious one, and he decided to get a hold of his brother to ask him for some advice. Darren told his brother what was going on, and after sitting on the phone for a moment, Darren would end up telling his brother that he figured it out. He apparently said that he could still climb out of his window and that he would try that and then call his brother back. That would be the last time that anyone had ever heard from Darren personally. After hours had passed and none of Darren's family had received word that he was safe, they all began to worry. Within 24 hours of the rain stops, search and rescue teams were sent out after Darren, and it wasn't long before they found his vehicle submerged in a part of highway that was essentially now a river. However, when they found the car, Darren was nowhere in sight. A little while later, investigators would find Darren's body about a mile away from his vehicle. He had drowned and been carried with the floodwater. A witness that had survived that day would say that she saw Darren getting out of his truck and standing on the roof as it began to be surrounded by water. Eventually, the truck began to be swept away, and Darren made the decision to get back inside of the vehicle. The witness said that shortly after the truck would end up getting sucked underneath the surface of the water and Darren disappeared. It wasn't until after Darren's death that it was discovered that he had made one final post on his Facebook page before his death. He would post a picture of the flood water rising around him with the caption, "And all I wanted to do was go home." Here is the last picture that Darren posted before his untimely death. Tyler Hadley was a teenager who seemed to develop a habit of getting into trouble. He was constantly caught skipping school, sneaking out of his house, and doing other activities that landed him in trouble with his parents and school authorities at times. And one night, Tyler had arrived back at his house, and he was showing clear signs of being intoxicated. This infuriated his parents, considering the fact that he was still only a teenager, so they decided to punish him. They took away his cell phone and his car keys. Tyler would end up telling his best friend Michael that he felt that his parents had crossed the line and that he wished he could kill them. Now, to his best friend, this seemed like more of a dramatic expression than him actually confessing that he wanted to murder his mother and father. So Michael just brushed it off. A few days after Tyler got in trouble for drinking, he would end up telling the people that he went to school with that he was going to be throwing a house party. None of his friends thought he was telling the truth, considering they knew that his parents were relatively strict people. Michael at first thought that Tyler was just bluffing. That was until he ended up receiving a Facebook invitation to a party at Tyler's house. And again, people were shocked to hear this was actually happening. One person even commented to ask what would happen if Tyler's parents came home. Tyler replied with a simple answer. He said, "Don't worry, they won't." When the day of the party arrived, Michael showed up with a group of his friends and was shocked at the magnitude of the event. The house was packed with random people who all seemed to have the same goal of trashing the home. Tyler didn't seem to mind it though, and at first, everyone was having a blast. It was until later in the night when Tyler made a confession to Michael that the situation got vastly more serious. After a few hours of partying, Tyler pulled Michael aside and told him that he had something to confess. This was when Tyler would tell his friend that his parents had never left town as he claimed, and instead, they were up in their bedroom, only they weren't alive. Michael thought his friend was just playing a morbid prank, of course, and tried to brush it off, but Tyler would press him harder into believing what he was saying. And after having a look around Tyler's home, Michael ended up finding signs that his friend had been telling him the truth. He began seeing blood in the upstairs of the house, leading into Tyler's parents' room. Michael decided to check for himself, just to be sure. And as he tried to open the door to the bedroom, the door would get stuck on the foot of Tyler's father's body as it lay on the floor. Torn about what he should do, Michael walked downstairs and took one final picture of himself and his friends before leaving the party and reporting the double homicide to the police. Tyler ended up receiving 2 life sentences for the murder of his parents. Here's a look at the scene that Michael stumbled upon that night. Sailor Gilliams and her good friend Brendan Vega were both 22 years old when they decided to go down a hiking trail that they assumed would be a fit for novice hikers. The trail was in Santa Barbara, California, and was supposed to lead to an amazing-looking waterfall that is actually a popular tourist attraction. Shortly after beginning the hike, however, the two would realize that it was actually a pretty difficult hike through some hazardous terrain. The hike involved trekking across boulder fields at an upward angle for about an hour to reach the waterfall. It wasn't long before the pair realized they were actually in a pretty bad situation, because as they made their way hopping from boulder to boulder and walking over large cracks, they ended up losing the trail they were on and couldn't pick it back up again. They were lost. As the day went on, the sun began to set and nightfall was setting in, and the two hikers continued to try to find their way back to the trail. It was at this point that Sailor ended up slipping as she jumped from a large rock and ended up fracturing her leg. Brendan knew that he would have to carry her out of the woods, so he helped her onto his back and began walking with her. The two traversed through the night, but in the dark, they couldn't see that they were heading toward a cliff and waterfall, and before they could stop themselves, they ended up plummeting off the side of the waterfall. After hitting the hard ground below, both of the hikers were still alive, but with far worse injuries than before. Sailor had broken her ankle in the fall, so now there was absolutely no chance of walking out. Meanwhile, Brendan had shattered his elbow in one arm, which meant he could no longer carry his friend. The two decided that Brendan would continue to try to find help, and Sailor would stay put and cry out for anyone who might be hiking by. The following day, a group of 3 hikers decided they wanted to look for the same waterfall that Sailor and Brendan had been looking for and get some pictures of it. They took photos of the trail as they hiked, and before long, they were looking out from above the waterfall. While on the edge of the cliff, the hikers couldn't help but notice something odd down below. It appeared to be a person laying on the ground. They had discovered Sailor, and it wasn't long before she was rescued. Sadly, Brendan never made it out of the trail alive. His body was found about 100 meters away from where he left Sailor. The hikers went back through their cameras and pictures later that day and were surprised at what they hadn't noticed. At one point, they must have been hiking right next to where Sailor had been laying. Here is a picture that one of the hikers found on the camera that they took. In the background, you can clearly see Sailor laying on the ground just waiting for help.